Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Is set up? Yes. So, today we are going to cover chapter 9 of this textbook, Labor Market. And basically it's about how we measure unemployment and what it means and how it behaves during the business cycle. So, how do we measure the labor force? There is a standard agreement about the concepts and the definitions of employment. The official definitions which are used are not completely adequate. Then there's the stock of people who are unemployed at a given time, and this is continuously changing. People are going into unemployment or going from unemployment to employment, so that's called the flow, the monthly changes. And then there's the stock, which is all employed people and all unemployed people. And there's this concept of hysteresis, which is called memory, basically. So, first of all, what are labor markets? This is not a natural concept, not a natural institution. There is a pool of people that are available for purchase in labor. This is not how traditional societies were constructed. And the fact that time is time is for sale, for money, this is in conflict with standard traditional societies. There's also, there was need to hire people to do work, and this has been done, but even in traditional societies. But basically there is a social dimension to this. Polanyi, in his book called The Great Transformation, has analyzed this. See, when you're used to thinking about things in one way, then it's difficult to think about things in another way. So, in fact, even though societies change and the conceptions of what is labor and what is not, the labor market came into existence with the market society. And this is an artificial market. It didn't exist before the market society. So, in fact, lots of things that we accept as given assumptions because we are used to them are in fact just artificial constructs, and they can be changed once we realize that this is something that has come into being by our agreeing to it. For example, the country of Pakistan is a social construct. It comes into existence because we all agree that there is this country, and other people also agree. If today all the world were to decide that, look, all human beings are brothers, there should be no countries, there should be no boundaries, and we should all be free, then suddenly all of the countries in the world would disappear. Now we often think, because we are used to living with it, that Pakistan is a physical existence. It is defined on the map, it has a boundary, it has just like, this ceiling is there, so Pakistan is there. But the ceiling is there and will be there even if we are not. But Pakistan is just a mental construct. It's something that it comes into existence because we agree to its existence. And it will disappear if we agree that it no longer exists. So similarly, the labor market is a social construct. So once we take this as for granted that there is this social construct, then within this there are ways to measure employment. So basically, full employment is desirable because in the standard economic theory framework anyway, within this framework we want to use all available resources so as to get efficiency. If some of the waste resources are lying idle, not productive, then we cannot get maximum production. Of course, one can question whether a society wants to get maximum production. In fact, from an Islamic point of view, the production of goods is not the object of life. So we should engage in it minimally. We should use our time for something valuable rather than using everybody 100% for the production of goods and services. Capitalism is all about the production of wealth. So it says that all of the men should be working, all of the women should be working, all of the children should be working. Everybody should be engaged in the production of wealth. And this is the efficient way of operating a society. So in a market society, the goal of life, the goal of society, goal of every individual is to produce wealth. And this then, efficiency is measured by how much wealth you could produce potentially and how much you are actually producing. And if there's a shortfall, then you have an output gap. So that's one way. But full employment is desirable for within a market society because nobody cares for anybody else. So if somebody is not working, then he will starve. In a traditional society, you have community, and so everybody is not required to work. Many people are protected, especially in traditional societies. Women are protected from the need to work because they have something more important to do. But in a market society, nothing is more important than production of wealth. So, going along with traditional market society ideas, let's temporarily agree that, okay, we're trying to produce maximum wealth. How can we achieve full employment? Now, there's another reason for, within a market society, if somebody is not employed, then he cannot support his family and so on. So these are harmful things. So full employment is useful in the sense of giving everybody social protection, and it's a relatively less burdensome way. See, the other way would be that the state provides or some other person provides support for people who are not working. So this is also against Islamic principles. Everybody should try to make sure that they earn enough to support themselves and their families. So in that sense, providing everybody with a job sufficient to fulfill his needs is job is not job in the sense that he should be producing enough, and his contribution to society in terms of productive service should be enough to compensate for the amount that he receives from the society. Anyway, how do we assess whether or not we have full employment? There are these rules that are used. This is called the labor force framework. These are used for statistical measurement. And so there are these three rules which are used to classify people as to whether they're employed or not. So there is the activity principle. There are some people who are working, there are some people who are unemployed, they are not working, and then there are some people who are not part of the labor force. So there are these three types of people. Now, if somebody is working part-time or doing multiple activities, like he's looking for work but he's also working, then should he be classified as a job seeker or should he be classified as an earner? So these are these priority rules which determine how you classify someone if there is a conflict. So basically in these rules, if somebody is working and also looking for work, he is classified as employed. Then of course there is a reference period. If you're asking, is this person employed or not? So what is the period of time within which we are looking? Is it last month or last year or last 3 months? So if the person had a job at the beginning of the year but he has been unemployed since last month, is he classified as employed or unemployed? So this depends on the time frame that we are looking at. All of these things are used in Pakistan Bureau of Statistics too, decide when they do the labor force survey. These are the rules they use to classify. Now, employment is always, within a market society, is considered as gainful work, meaning that you work and you get money for it. Otherwise, the person is not counted as employed. And this is a serious problem. So it's work for. So if child rearing, especially, is the most important job in a society, because if you bring up all the children right, then you create a good society, and if you bring up all the children wrong, then you destroy society in one generation. So, but this doesn't have any money, and so this does not count as work. So if two women exchange babysitting services, you looked after my child, I'll pay you $100. The other one looks after your child and you pay $100, and suddenly there is $200 of gain in GNP, which didn't exist before. So this many people have come up with problems in how GDP is measured, how national wealth is measured, and this is one of the serious problems, that if women start working, then the loss to society in terms of child care is not counted in, and the gain to society from the productive work that the women, in fact, again it happens double. Usually women start working, then the child care is also becomes a paid activity, and so there is a sudden boost to GNP which doesn't really exist in reality. But it seems like the GNP is increasing. So how do you define employed? There's this technical definition by the ILO, International Labour Organization. So basically, if you do some work for money, even if you're temporarily unemployed, you're counted as an employed person. So when we come to statistics, there are 3 or 4 key concepts. One is the WAP, the working age population. This is generally something like 15 to 60 or something like that. Then there is the labor force. In this working age population, there are people who are looking for work. And then there is the employed, which we have already seen how you define, basically people who are working for money. And then there is the unemployed, people who are looking for work, but they cannot find jobs. So the unemployment rate is defined to be the ratio of the unemployed to the labor force. So the denominator is the number of people who are looking for work. So this is very important, because this is not the working age population. The employment ratio is the number of people who are employed out of the working age population, so that's 60%. So this means that there's 40% left over. In this 40%, some are unemployed and some are not looking for work. From these two numbers, we cannot. Can we determine? I'm not sure. Okay, so there's employed is 60%. The labor force is, we can't. Suppose, for example, there are 100 people in the economy. 100 people of working age population. Of these, 60 people are employed. The unemployed are 5%. Oh yes, now we can. So it means that if you add the unemployed, that will be 5% of 60. So that's about 3 people who are unemployed. So if you add 3 unemployed people, then the total labor force is 63, and 3 out of 60 are unemployed, and then the remaining 37 people are not active, not looking for work. So the 37 people are those who are part of working age population but not looking for work. So from these two we can calculate that the labor force is 63 people, and the unemployed are 3 people, and the employed are 60 people, and the not looking for work are 37. Okay, this is sort of the classification, that there is the working age population, which is broken up into the labor force and not in the labor force. Among the labor force we have the employed and the unemployed. The unemployed are people who don't have any jobs in which they earn money, and that's the official unemployment rate or the unofficial unemployed number. Among the employed people, there are many types of people. There are full-time workers, and there are part-time workers who would like to work, who would like to work more. And then there are people who are satisfied with the amount of work that they have, and there are people who have inadequate employment. They would like to work in a different job which is more suited to their skills, for example. That's another kind of hidden unemployment, in the sense that they could be far more productive, but they're working at a job in which their skills are not used. Among the people who are not in the labor force, there are workers who want to work and they are available but they are not working. These are the discouraged workers normally. These people have stopped looking for work because the market conditions are bad for some reason. But so if they are available, if a job was offered to them, they would take it. But because if the question on the survey is, are you actively looking for work? Sometimes they even say, have you made any job applications? So if they are not actively looking for work, then classified as not part of the labor force. So these are people who are discouraged because they see that there are no jobs, so they tried very hard and they didn't find, and now they're sitting. And then there are workers who want work, but they are not available for some reason. Maybe they're taking a trip, or maybe they have a temporary illness or something like that. So these people are classified as not part of the labor force. And then there's a third category, people who have pensions and are not allowed to work for some reason. So forced pensions. So there is many types of categories of workers. The labor force participation rate is the number of people who are in the labor force as a proportion of the working age population. These are the people who are looking for work as opposed to the total population. So in the last calculation we saw that 63 people are looking for work. So 63% is your labor force participation rate. Now this labor force participation rate goes up and down. More people start looking for work when the economy picks up. When there are jobs available, then more people start looking for work. And when the economy slows down and there's a recession and jobs are being lost, then people stop looking for work. So this is the behavior of the labor force participation ratio. It shows that this starts at 1990. In the early 1990s, there was a severe recession in Australia, which caused a major decline in the participation ratio. It went from 61.5% to 60%, the first part. Then from the first blue band is the first recession in the early 90s. And then the economy was growing, so the labor force participation ratio also started to grow. Then there was a small crash in 1995, which led to a decline in the labor force participation. And then generally things went up until about the global financial crisis, at which point the labor force participation ratio became flat and went down later on. In 2008, in 2007, when the global financial hit, the employment growth slowed and the participation rate also fell. The Australian government reacted to the crisis by introducing 2 large fiscal stimulus packages. What's a fiscal stimulus? Yes, government spending program. Normally, government builds infrastructure or takes large public projects. And so, for that reason, after the global financial crisis, you don't see a decline in the labor force participation ratio. In fact, it picks up as a result of the stimulus. Now, unemployment itself is of different types and classified in different ways. There is something which is called frictional unemployment, and this is basically due to the matching problem that somebody is looking for a job, somebody is looking for a laborer, but they can't find each other very easily, so that it takes some time for the jobs to advertise, to get applications, to screen applicants and to select. And meanwhile, the person who is also looking for a job, he is also sending applications to many jobs and considering and interviewing. So the amount of time that is spent in this, that's called frictional unemployment. There is seasonal unemployment. So there are some seasons, especially in agriculture, where there's harvesting season, everybody can find work. And then there are some seasons which are slack. And so in those seasons there is not many jobs around. There is structural unemployment. So now, for example, suppose that we launch a major housing construction project. So now there are certain types of skills which are needed to build housing, and suppose the population doesn't have these skills. So there will be some time before we can retrain the people to acquire the skills that are needed. So there are jobs around and there are people around, but there is a skill mismatch, and that's called structural. And then there is cyclical unemployment, which is associated with the business cycle. As the economy goes up, people get jobs, and as the economy goes down into recession, people lose jobs, and so there's this type of unemployment. So now the question is, how do we classify Well, there are these categories. Are you available for work? It means that if job is offered to you, can you join right away? So somebody is currently sick, he'll say, no, I'm not available for work right now, or he might have some other social responsibilities that he must fulfill, looking after your mother or so on. So when are you available for work? That matters. If you're available for work within 1 month, then he is counted as being available. If he's not available for work within 1 month, then he's counted as being not available. So these are sort of arbitrary. I mean, we decide whether it's 1 week or 1 month or 3 months. And then there's the disability. Somebody is handicapped for some reason. So he could be classified as being permanently unavailable for work. As the text says, that there is some evidence that disability is used. The government, these are all of these statistics are political, in the sense that every government wants to show that our government is creating jobs and reducing unemployment. So the data comes in, and then you say, okay, put all the people who have disabilities into unavailable. That way they will go out of the labor force and our unemployment figure will improve. So some disabilities are very minor and do not prevent you from working. But so there are, because of the fact that these numbers matter a lot, and both the government and the opposition parties are very concerned about them, so there is lots of arguments at how we should classify them, and there is no given right definition, so arguments can always be constructed. Basically, like all of these things, there is a qualitative dimension to unemployment. It's not just numbers and counts. Lots of, just like, the number of publications is a quantitative measure of research, but the quality of your publication is not measurable directly. Similarly, you can create jobs which are digging ditches, and you can have more meaningful jobs. So there is also a qualitative dimension to work which cannot be captured by numbers. So the business cycle is important in the employment figures. The labor force participation rate is pro-cyclical, as we've already discussed. As you go on the upside of the business cycle, by the way, business cycle is not, as most people think, that the GNP is going up and down, or GNP per capita. It's actually, the business cycle is the output gap. If the output gap is 0, then you are at the top of the business cycle, and if there is an output gap, so you could always, GNP could keep increasing throughout the business cycle. That's why there is a difference between a recession. A recession happens when there is unemployment. So it means that the potential output is higher than the actual output, because there are people who are unemployed. Now, even though there's always people who are coming into the labor force, and productivity is also increasing, so it's possible that your GNP per capita is increasing because while some people are losing jobs because the productivity has increased, and not only are some people losing jobs, but the new entrants are not being able to find jobs, so there's a lot of unemployment, but at the same time GNP is still increasing. So business cycle is not measured by whether GNP per capita is increasing or not. It's measured by the conditions in the labor market, actually. So if there is an output gap, then if there's no output gap, you're at the top of the business cycle. If the output gap is decreasing, that's the upside of the business cycle. If the output gap is increasing, then you are going down in the business cycle. So the labor force participation rate is pro-cyclical when jobs are being created and people are being hired, then more people get interested in participating in the labor force. And when the jobs are being lost and the unemployment is increasing, then people get discouraged and they stop being part of the labor force. So discouraged workers are hidden unemployed. These are people who are just like your other unemployed, but they've stopped looking for jobs. So if they were offered jobs, then they would start working. So true unemployment rates are higher than the observed rate in recessions, because the measured unemployment is the number of unemployed divided by the labor force participants. But there are many people who would become participants if jobs were available, so the denominator would be higher if there were not any discouraged workers. Now, the next concept is the duration of unemployment. How long has somebody been unemployed? So, it matters because suppose you have a labor force of 100 people and you have unemployment rate of 8%. Means over a year, 8 people are unemployed for the whole year. Now, it could be that there is a particular 8 people who remained unemployed throughout the whole year. Or it could be that every month a different group of 8 people become unemployed. So the second situation is relatively better because everybody is getting jobs, but some people are losing jobs temporarily and finding other jobs. So that's but the first situation where 8 people are out of the workforce for unable to find jobs for an year, this is not so good for those 8 people. And so the duration, but the unemployment rate is the same, 8% in both cases. So that's why we need to look more carefully at the duration, because it matters for the. So there are some cyclical patterns in the duration. When you start entering into a recession, there are large flows into unemployment. Lots of people lose their jobs. Short-term unemployment becomes suddenly higher because people have lost their jobs, but they have been unemployed only for a short period of time. So when you look at the overall pool of unemployment, there will be a lot of people in it who have short duration of unemployment. Then when the recession becomes longer, then your net inflows into the state of unemployment remain positive. More people are losing jobs. But now the duration of unemployment starts to increase because many people have had lost jobs and they have been unemployed for a long time. The average duration of unemployment starts to rise more sharply in this stage. As the longer the recession, the higher the long-term unemployment rate, and the long-term unemployment is defined as duration of unemployment of 6 months or more. If somebody has been unemployed for 6 months, then he is classified as long-term unemployed. In Australia and UK, this is defined as 12 months or more. Now, as the economy starts to recover, then your flow into unemployment starts to fall, flows into employment start to pick up, the pool of unemployment is becoming reduced, but there is some bias in the sense that the employers do not like to hire people who have been unemployed for a long time. So the first one to pick jobs are the ones who have short duration of unemployment. And so the duration of unemployment actually will increase in this situation because you have a large pool. Let's say there are 10 people who have been unemployed for 1 month and 10 people who have been unemployed for 2 months, and so on, 3 months and 4 months. So if those people who have been unemployed for 1 month, they all get jobs, then the average duration of unemployment will rise. And so that's what tends to happen. In early stages of growth, as the recovery occurs, more jobs are created. First, one to be picked off will be the new entrants, and then among the unemployed pool, the people with less duration will be picked up. So basically, what he's saying is that for recovery to happen, job growth has to be not just strong enough to pick up the new entrants, but it has to cut into the existing pool of unemployment. So here is a graph of the Australian duration of unemployment. See, if you look at February 2008, the duration of unemployment is about 15 months, and the unemployment rate is about 5%. Now, as you go along, you see that the duration is not changing very much, but the unemployment is increasing. As you go to May 2009, you see that there is a substantial rise in unemployment, and there is also a rise in the duration of unemployment. So it goes from about 15 weeks to about 20 weeks. Now, in May 2009, the Australian government undertook fiscal stimulus, and so this stopped the increase in unemployment, and now you see that the unemployment is remaining fixed at 10%. The new entrants are getting jobs, they are not getting, but the pool of unemployment is not being reduced at this point. So this may also be due to the fact that as the fiscal stimulus takes effect, jobs are being created. So when jobs are being created, what will happen is that those people who were not in the labor force, they would start entering the labor force. So even though lots of jobs are being created, the unemployment ratio would remain the same because the denominator is increasing. So basically it goes vertically up. What happens is that the duration of unemployment is increasing, and this can also happen because people who didn't have a job for a long time now enter the labor force and start looking for a job. So previously they were not in there. Now you suddenly have a person who is looking for a job and he has been unemployed for 3 years. So this will again cause. So basically you have this vertical upwards movement where duration is increasing, unemployment is flat. Then at some point the recovery becomes quite strong, and so now you find that people are getting jobs and unemployment is actually going down, but the duration remains pretty flat because basically those people, I mean the ones with low duration are being picked up, so the duration of unemployment remains flat at 40%, even though unemployment is reducing substantially, going back from 10% to 7%. Well, this is US data. All right, now we come to the concept of hysteresis. This is a very important concept. It basically comes from physics, and it says that the current state of the system is dependent on what happened in the past. Now, so there is some memory in the system. This conflicts with this corresponds to in economics a situation where you have multiple equilibria. So which equilibrium you get to depends on where you start. So if you start near to there can be a high growth equilibrium and a low growth equilibrium, and where you start will depend on will determine where you get to. So this is also called path dependence. So in order to predict where you are, you have to look at the path, and this is also called history dependence. Why this matters is that the economists typically think there is this NAIRU, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. So basically, the level of unemployment, there is supposedly a natural rate of unemployment which will be generated by the system, by the number of jobs and the number of unemployed. But this natural rate can be influenced by history. So depending on a particular path, there may be an equilibrium in which unemployment is 2%, and there may be another equilibrium in which unemployment is 3%. So there is no natural rate. Depending on how the economy behaves, depending on, see, if you create a lot of discouraged workers by a particular path and they never come back into the market because the job growth rate is slow, then they will unemployment will be different. And if you have a different set of policies which prevents people from entering into the discouraged worker pool, you might get higher employment rates. And so because basically the equilibrium inflation rate is actually dependent on consensus. If everybody knows that there is going to be 10% inflation, then basically this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then when the employers negotiate with the employees for wages for next year, everybody is calculating that yes, there will be inflation of 10%, so employees ask for 10% wage increase, employers agree to 10% wage increase because they also think that we are going to be able to sell our products at 10% more. So once this is done, this is built into the economy. So inflation is, once everybody anticipates 10% inflation, then all decisions are made on the assumption that prices will be 10% higher. Then this becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the equilibrium value is generated by social consensus, both of the inflation and also of unemployment to some extent. So this consensus can be manipulated by policy. For example, in Turkey there was hyperinflation. My student Erdem Başçı was head governor of the state bank, and he was given the task to bring it down. So what he did was he said that, okay, we are going to introduce this new currency called the Yeni Lira. The Lira was the old currency, Yeni Lira was the new Lira. And the new Lira will be, we will keep it at a stable rate. So the new Lira was introduced. It was equal to I think 100,000 old Turkish Lira, because the inflation, we used to buy bread in Turkey for 100,000, I think. When I came in, we lived there for 6 years, so when I came in, the bread was selling for about 20,000, and by the time, in 5 years, it was at, I don't remember, it might have been 50,000 or something like that. So it was changing very frequently. So anyway, he said that, okay, we'll cut off a lot of zeros and introduce this Yeni Turkish Lira. And so what's this? This is just a psychological trick. You can say, okay, now from now on this, we will call this. But this gives people some, and then they said that we will call this, we will maintain prices stable in this Lira. And because the people believed him, so so the prices stabilized, and then ultimately they finished the old Lira, and the Yeni Lira just became Lira, and so now it's back to Lira. But the hyperinflation was gone. The inflation rate was about 70% or 60% per year. for more than 10 years. Similarly, so basically, there was a time when around, I think, after the global financial crisis, when people were very concerned about the euro, and there was a run on the euro, and people were and the euro was losing value very fast. So Mario Draghi, the head of the European Union Central Bank, he announced that we will do whatever it takes to maintain the value. And once he announced that, then the value stabilized. He didn't really have to do anything, but when people said that, okay, they will do anything to protect the euro, then they said, okay, it will remain stable. When everybody believes that it will remain stable, then it becomes stable. So why is there hysteresis in the labor market? So a recession leads to a sudden jump in unemployment. When you have prolonged recession, you have many employed people with long durations. That leads to discouraged workers, people who are not looking for jobs. This is the supply side, but also you have a mechanism on the demand side. When the workers, we have seen that when the employers are looking for new employees, and when there is a large pool, then they use what are called screening devices. I mean, if you get 1,000 applications for your job, as we did some time ago in Islamic University, applied for Naib Qasids, there were 2 positions or 5 positions, and there were 1,000 applicants. Ministers were calling to get their people hired. So now you have to say, okay, how am I going to select? You need some device. I mean, there's not that much, difference in skill sets. You can hire X or Y. So what we did was we say, okay, we'll take only matrix, even though there's no real relationship between matric pass and Naib Qasid job, but it reduced the pool to a manageable size, maybe 100 out of the. So this is a screening device. Another way we can say is somebody who has not had a job for somebody, and we consider that people who are experience. Okay, we look at experience. So somebody who has had working experience, we consider that as more reliable. So if somebody has no work experience over the past year, he gets screened. It's just a way to reduce the size of the candidates before evaluating them. You have to shortlist a small number of candidates. Basically, you are allowed to shortlist up to about 4 to 10. So if you have 5 vacancies, you should have about maximum 50 people you can screen. So you eliminate 950, and you need to find some rational device, otherwise you will get calls of discriminations and many other difficult problems. So you have to set some screening device which is used. So, so for people who are disadvantaged for some reason, they are screened out. You don't give them a chance because of many reasons. And so the discouraged workers remain discouraged. They don't find jobs even when the jobs are available. Also, if you have discrimination like against blacks and women, this is one easy way to screen people. And that's why the laws work. I mean, if you say that you are forced to hire women or hire blacks, then this works as a counter to the automatic screening. So there are also demand side effects. As when you have a recession, then the older firms with obsolete technology go under. They fall out of the labor. So many laborers have skills which are based on older technology, and these skills are no longer valuable in the market. This is called skill atrophy. People also stay out of practice for a while, then they lose their skill. Also, people who are unemployed lose confidence. They have worse health characteristics than employed people. They also lose their social networks. People have friends and relations and who can help them. So there are people who are newly entering the labor force, but if the jobs are tight, then they are denied a lot of skills are acquired on the job. So they are denied the opportunity to get the training they need, and they are denied the social networks. So they become permanently disadvantaged in a tight labor market. So some of the factors which matter for jobs are also the skills, and new entrants are usually given training. In higher level jobs, you look for people who already have training. So basically, entry level jobs is the place where training is given. So as the economy picks up, the average skills and experience declines because you are getting these new entries without training. When you have an upturn, then the fresh entrants, the new entrants, and the low duration unemployed get jobs first. The high duration unemployed are bypassed. So this leads to a policy recommendation that in a recession, the government needs to do fiscal stimulus to provide jobs and also to provide trainings, because typically the employers are reluctant to provide training because there is a real threat that when you provide training, then the employee will jump to better jobs, because now you see the other firm can offer this firm has invested money in training. Now they want to get the return, but for the other firm, getting a free trained worker is much more attractive than training its own worker. So they can make better offers than the existing firm. So jumping jobs after training is a common phenomenon. So that's for that reason, knowing that the firm will be reluctant to provide training. So this is an externality which the government can fill by doing skill development, by doing vocational training, by picking up some of the expense of this training. When the economy heats up, then that means that there are more jobs than there are applicants. In this situation, then the firms become more likely to provide training, and also irrational screening, that you just drop 900 applicants on the basis of some random criteria. This doesn't happen anymore because you have just the right number of applicants. You want to look at everyone to see who is the best for the job. Now there are some institutional structures which govern the labor market. The International Labour Organization is the biggest one, and it has the mandate to collect statistics, and so they provide regulations and rules on how we should measure and what we should measure, and everybody participates to some extent. They also make rules about labor, what are the health standards, what are the safety standards, and so on. So they ask us to collect data on the economically active workers. They provide, they collect information on the type of jobs we have. In Pakistan, they have been concerned about child labor issues, about child bondage and brick kilns, working conditions. They are supposed to look at the adequacy of wages for households and the regulation of disputes, strikes, etc. between labor and capital. Originally, the labor ILO was founded when communist parties were strong, and these were considered as advocates of labor rights. But today the Marxists think that these are just instruments of the capitalists for regulating dissent, that make sure that the dissent doesn't increase to the levels where there is some disruption to the system. Now we come to what I think may be the last topic. This is the stocks and flows into the labor market. So at any one point, an adult member of the population, somebody who is in the working age, can either be employed or unemployed or not in the labor force. So the employment at time t, the people who are employed at time t are those who were employed at time t minus 1 plus UE is the flow from unemployed to employed. So these are the people who were unemployed, were unemployed in period t minus 1 and became employed in period t. So this is the flow from unemployed to employed, plus the flow from the N, which is the non-labor force, non-participants, to employed. So some people who were not part of the labor force, they could also become employed. So there are the two flows which are flowing into the employment pool, and then there are two flows which are out of the employment pool. So there are people who were employed and then they became unemployed, and there were people who were employed, they became not part of the labor force. So there are two inflows and two outflows, and you add this to the stock. The stock of labor at time t minus 1 is Et minus 1. To this stock you add the flows into the employment pool and subtract the flows out of the employment pool, and you get the stock at time period t. So there is a table which shows these measures, I think, for Australia. So the total employment at time t is 148.793, and the employment t minus 1 was 149. So actually there has been a reduction in employment, even though 1.5 million people became employed who were unemployed. So the 1.59 million jobs were gained by the unemployed people, and 4.4 million jobs were gained by people who were not part of the labor force. They became part of the labor force. This can be new entrants, people who became age 15, so they were not part of the labor force, or this can be discouraged workers who were not active in the labor force. So there were lots of jobs created for 1.6 plus 4.4, about 6%, 6 million. But then there were 2.1 people who had jobs and they became unemployed, and then there were 4.8 million people who had jobs and they became part of the non-labor force. This could be people who retired, like aged the upper age limit of working, or this could be people who were injured and they became lost their jobs. This would probably be small. So the inflows were large, but the outflows were even larger. So basically there was a net change that was lower. So there are some very simple formulas for the net change in employment. It's the same formula that we have seen. The change in employment is given by these two inflows minus the two outflows. And similarly, the change in unemployment is also given by the inflows to unemployment from employed and from not part of the labor force, and outflows subtracted those people who were unemployed, they became employed, or they became part of the non-labor force. So that's also can be decomposed into numbers. Here is the matrix of the labor market state transition probabilities in US. So in the rows we have the last period status, and in the columns we have the current period status. So the 95% means that 95% who were employed last period remained employed. So this is the flow from the employment to employment. These are the people who didn't change their status. This is actually the stock of the employed. Now 5% people changed. About 1% of the people who were employed lost their jobs, and 3% let's say that they retired, so they were no longer in the labor force. This should add to 100%. There's a round off error here. It could be 0.015 and 0.035. Now, of the unemployed people, 21% gained jobs, they became employed. 54% remained unemployed, so this is now going to affect this is, I think, 1 month, December 2015 to January. This is over 1 month. So about 54% people remained unemployed, so this would add about 1 month to the duration of employment in the employment pool. And 25% became part of the not in labor force. This could be due to becoming discouraged worker, or retiring, or having an injury, or becoming unavailable for some reason, like child care or elderly care. So these people would be no longer available for the labor force. Then there were these not in the labor force. About 5% of these people became employed. So these are people who are either not active or discouraged workers or something else. Some of these people, so 5% of these became employed, 2% of them became unemployed, which means that they entered the labor force. They started looking for jobs, but they didn't find any. And 93% of them remained. So these were the people who were retired people, they remained retired. So the labor market is a pretty dynamic affair. People are constantly moving between jobs, from jobs to unemployed, from unemployed to not part of labor force, etc., to active to inactive status. And so the flows from the different states show you what's happening. These flows are highly cyclical. They depend on the business cycle. In the recession, the flow from employed to unemployed increases, and the flow from the unemployed to employed declines. Dropouts also occur, so you have flows from to the not in labor force. Labor force participation rate drops. Right, so that's it. Now, if you will go back to your previous lecture on labor, this has nothing to do with that, in the sense that